Good morning. My research area is environment and energy economics and climate change. So today I'm very honored to share with you a development story of a particular industry sector in China, the renewable energy sector. So in the past several years, if you read the newspaper, you will find that every year the global surface temperature got a record high. Right? I guess it's also true for this year. So the main reason of the is because of global climate change. So according to the report published by the IPCC in 2021, the global carbon concentration was the highest in the last 2 million years, and the global surface temperature was the highest in the last 120,000 years. And here I show the two figures in the slide. The left figure shows the global surface temperature from the first century to today. And you can see that before 1850, the global surface temperature was kind of stable. But after 1850, when the Industrial Revolution started, there we see a big jump up of the global surface temperature. And the climate change will have a lot of damaging effects on our society and also on the ecosystems. There are a lot of huge study in economic literature. Given the time, I will skip that. These are some study of our research team, but I don't have time. Next. Okay. So the main reason of the global climate change was because the greenhouse gas effect, and the greenhouse gas effect is mainly caused by the carbon emission and also including other greenhouse gas. So here the figure shows the global carbon emission from 1850 to today. You can see that in 1850, when the industrial revolution just started, the global carbon was only 200 million. Today it's about 36 million annually. But if we look at the data for different countries, so China alone contributes a lot to the global carbon emissions, maybe about 1/3. So in 2023, the carbon emission from China was around 13 billion tons. China alone, is more than the sum of U.S., Europe, and India. The next three largest carbon emitters. But in the history, about 30 years ago, China carbon emitter was much lower than U.S. and the European country. Here, the figure. There are three lines on the figure, right? One is for the U.S., one is for all European countries, and the other is for the China. And you can see that because of China's rapid industrialization, so China's carbon emission increased very fast. Especially in 2006, China surpassed the US, becoming the world's largest carbon emitter. And after that, China's carbon, kept increasing trajectory. And also because of 2006, China surpassed the US, becoming the world's largest emitter. So China, incurred a lot of pressure from the international community on, fighting with the climate change and reducing carbon emissions. So that's let me go to the next. So why China, emits such a large amount of carbon? The main reason is simple. I think China has a very similar energy structure as in South Africa. Right? Both countries have abundant of resource of coals. So coal in China and South Africa is very cheap, much cheaper than natural gas or oil. So you can see that in 2008, the coal alone accounted about 72% of the total energy consumption in China. But in the last around 17 years, China made a lot of effort to reduce the dependence on the coal. You can see the number change. The total consumption, the percentage, the share of coal in the total energy consumption has reduced to from 72 to 54%. And you can see that in 2008, the wind and the solar PV was almost zero at that time. But today, they two together was close to 10% of the total energy consumption in China. And also nuclear fusion, natural gas, all increase a lot. So you can see that so in the last 17 years, China is transitioned from more dependent on fossil fuel to more dependent on the renewable energy or clean energies. So what happened behind this change? So as I mentioned that China surpassed US became the largest carbon emitter in 2006. So we had a lot of pressure from the international community. So then China started to announce its climate change policy plans. Especially in 2009, the Prime Minister Wen Jiabao announced that 2020 climate goals in Copenhagen Climate Change Conference. There are many different policies, were released after that. The 2020 targets, there are mainly two goals. One goal is that non-fossil fuel should account for 50% of China's total energy consumption in 2020. So in 2008, it's only about 7%. And then energy consumption per unit of GDP should decrease by between 40 to 45% compared to 2005. So under this target, and this target is mandatory. So there are different policies were released, as I mentioned. So, for example, subsidy policy. The subsidy policy mainly subsidize the renewable energies, like wind and solar power and the EVs. As I mentioned, at that time, the wind and solar EV were almost zero in China. You can see the policy name of EV. At that time, the policy name of EV is called 10 cities, 1,000 EVs. That's the initial policy. And then besides the subsidy policy for renewable energy, we also have introduced a command and control policy like the mandatory reduction of energy consumption and energy intensity for different local governments. And then we also introduced carbon trading market system in China. So today I will share with you about the subsidy on renewable energy and how the whole sector develops. So this figure shows the newly installed solar PV panel in US, all European countries, and China. So you can see that after 2020, again, before 2010, right, China's annual installed capacity of solar PV was much lower than US and all European countries, but today it's much higher. Right? Today, in 2023, China has installed about 240 gigawatts of solar PV capacity, and China alone has accounted for 63% of the global newly installed capacity in 2023. And this number was increased further in 2024. This is a figure showing the newly installed capacity of wind power in China. Again, you can see that in the early time, right, China's newly installed capacity was much lower than US and all European countries, but today much more. So today, China alone has accounted about 66% of the global newly installed capacity of wind power. EVs. As I mentioned that in 2008, the initial project was called 10 City 1,000 EVs, but today China, in last year, China EV sale was close to 13 million. That's last year number, and this year the number was keep increasing. So today EV sale was already accounted about 40% of all vehicles sold in China, and accounted about 67% of the global EV sales. So from this three figure, you can see that China has experienced a rapid development of wind, solar, and EVs. Right? What happened? So go back to the 2008. At that time, when we all know that the wind, solar, and the EV, they are new technology. They are very expensive, right? More expensive than coal-fired power, and more expensive than the traditional cars. So here, as Professor Wang Min mentioned, that the government policy was important, but also more important is the market. So let me introduce a little bit about the renewable development of wind and solar power. So I would say there are three phases for wind and solar power. Before 2009, yes, China has some, try and experiment subsidy policy for wind and solar power. At that time, the policy was called auction for feed-in tariff. Feed-in tariff is the price paid to the wind and solar producers. So for each project, different producers should bid for the price they want to get paid. And who bid the lowest will win the project. So this is kind of called competitive bidding. It's more like there's competition among different the producers. So under this policy, there are some small scale development of wind and solar power. Okay, but as I mentioned that because of 2009, the Chinese released the target for 2020, right? And so the central government start to increase they want to target to improve the renewable development. So that comes to the second stage, starting in 2009. There's a big shift of the subsidy policy. The policy from the auction fit to fixed fit. Fixed fit means all projects will receive the fixed price from the under the gap between the fixed fit and the market price of power is paid by the government, by the central government. So, and the fixed fit was regulated by the central government, and the price, the fit was different, across different resource regions. And at that time, you can see that in 2009, the fixed fit for wind power was, between 50 and 60 Chinese cents per kilowatt hour. Was much higher than the qualified power price, which was close to 30 cents per kilowatt hour. And in 2011, the fixed fit for solar power was introduced. At that time, solar was much more expensive than wind, and the price was 100 Chinese cents per kilowatt hour. Okay, and where does subsidy money, where does subsidy funding come from? So China follow the Germany model that is is user pay the subsidy. So there's a funding, there's a fixed fee was added to the price of each kilowatt hour used by the industrial and the commercial users. Okay, so it's a user pays the subsidy for renewables. So because of the new policy, so we see super fast renewable development under these new policies. Just for the wind power, when the new policy was introduced that year, the new installed capacity was 92 gigawatts, more than the existing total capacity installed. And after that, between 2009 and 2015, the growth rate was kept around 40% every year. And the same story for the solar power. So when the new policy was shifted, when the policy was shifted to the fixed fee, the annual installed capacity was 2.1 gigawatt in 2011, more than the existing total capacity. And between 2011 and 2017, the annual growth rate of the newly installed capacity of solar was 100%. Okay, so because of the fast growth of the wind and solar power in the second phase, so China also incurred some challenge of the renewable development. There are two main challenges. The first is the increasing subsidy debt. Because the renewable development increased so fast, so the subsidy funding is limited. So the central government own a lot to the private investor in renewable energy. And in the meantime, there's a high curtailment rate. Curtailment means when the wind and solar power is generated, they cannot transmit, cannot connect to the grid. So here I will show some numbers. Like for example, the subsidy debt increased from 19 billion Chinese yuan in 2014 to close to 300 billion Chinese yuan in 2019. And the curtailment rate for wind and solar was around 15 or 20% in these years. Okay, and the main reason we did some research at that time. We cooperated with the central government, and our argument is that because it's over subsidy led to this over investment of the wind and solar power, causing that two problems: subsidy debt and the high curtailment rate. Why there's over subsidy? So the main reason is because in that time, even today, the cost of wind and solar power, decreased so fast. For example, in 2010 and 2018, the global average cost of wind fell down by 34%, and the cost of solar power dropped by 77%. But in the meantime, the fixed fee for these two renewable energy, also decreased, but not as fast as the reduction of the cost. That eventually lead to over subsidy. So then we come to the last stage, which started from 2018. So now at that time, the China government started to phase out the renewable subsidies. The first step is to shift from the fixed fee to auction fee. Right? As I mentioned, auction fee is competitive bidding for the project, and whose price is the lowest will win the project. So the project was very effective. So the bidding price, the winning price was much lower than the fixed fee, regulated by the government at that time. And then because of the success of the auction policies, so very soon, after around 2020, the price and the wind and solar is almost very close to the core-fired power. So then the central government announced that after 2020, first, the electricity price subsidy for newly installed onshore wind power, solar PV farms, and the industrial and the commercial distribution of solar PV will be ended. So now today, there are no further subsidy for renewable wind and solar power in China. Okay. And then in the next year, the subsidy for the offshore wind power was ended. Okay, after the subsidy was phased out, we can see that yes, the wind and solar PV power, their development was slowed down. Look at the number I showed here. So for solar PV, right after 2018, we see a jump down of the annual capacity from 53 to 44, then to 30. Then very soon, it recovered, right? After 2 years, reduction of the installed capacity of solar PV, then it recovered very soon, right? From 30 to 49, 43, 86 to 140, 217 gigawatts. And then last year, close to 240 gigawatts. And a similar story for wind power, right? When the renewable subsidy was started to phase out, it decreased and then recovered very soon. And the same story applies to the EV development in China. So this figure shows the subsidy policy for EV in China. The horizontal line shows the mileage. The vertical line shows the years. So the subsidy amount for different cars with different mileage is different. And then you can see that over time, right, it's also phased out. And the subsidy for EV was ended in 2022. So again, today there are no further subsidy for EV in China. Okay. So why China can achieve such a great success of renewable development? Right? So I think the main reason I think is because the renewable cost fell dramatically in the last decade. Renewable products are very much different from the fossil fuels. Renewable products, they are kind of manufacturing products. If it's a manufacturing product, that means it could have a large economy of scales. That means the larger the output, the lower the cost. And in contrast, right, the coal-fired electricity is has a limited economy of scale. Why? Because the cost of coal-fired power is dependent on the fuel, right? And also their technology is kind of mature. This figure shows the cost reduction of different renewable energy like solar PV and the wind power and the onshore wind and the offshore wind between 2010 and 2019. You can see that, especially for solar PV, it dropped by 82%. As I mentioned that if we go back to the time in 2010, at that time solar PV power cost was much higher than the wind power. Today, the cost of solar PV power was lower than wind power in China. So what behind this is mainly, you can say after the subsidy was canceled, the whole sector was, kept fast increasing. So you can see that the improved technology, the improved competitiveness on the market played a much more important role, right, in the past several years. So here I want to conclude about the main lessons of for the whole sector development. So here I will, just as Professor Wang Min said, so the government and the market coordination is very important, right, even for the renewable development in China. Right. So as I mentioned, in the early stage of the industrial development, right, the new technology generally are very expensive. Right? Their cost is higher than the traditional cost, the traditional technology. Right? They have a weak competitiveness. Right? So so in the initial stage, the government support could play a very important role, right, to introduce the entry of this new technology, right? To then you can cultivate the large scale to cultivate a large scale demand for the new technology. Now what's the rationale for the subsidy for the wind and solar and EVs? I think economics will have a turn, right, for the externalities. So two externalities provide an important reason for subsidy. First, because fossil fuels, right, produce negative externalities, right? Air pollution and carbon emission. So renewable, they are substituted for the fossil fuels. So we should subsidize the renewable energy because they address the negative externality from the fossil fuels. Another rationale is that, as I mentioned, renewable production is kind of manufacturing production. They have a large scale of economies. So this is also a positive externality. So that's another reason to subsidize this technology. But for an industrial project to succeed, I think more important, of course, government support or subsidy is important in the early stage, but more important is the improve the technology and improve the competitiveness, right, led by the market and the private investors. And industry a sector cannot, an industry cannot success without the phase out of the subsidy policies. So from the last several slides, we can see that, right, even after the policy was cancelled, the whole sector kept fast growth. And this, as I mentioned, that is a transition from the government support to more market-driven growth. Right? So here, as I mentioned, that so these two, when the market demand ramped up, the new technology entered a self-reinforcing cycle. That means when the market demand, then there's a production of renewable energy, and then there's a scale economies. Then the scale economy can drive the continuous technology improvement and also the cost reduction. Then cost reduction increases the market demand again. Then there's positive, self-reinforcing cycles. So eventually, as the new technology becomes more competitive, so gradually the subsidy policy can phase out. And today, I'm very glad to share with you that today the cost of the wind and the solar power is much lower than the coal-fired power. Coal-fired power. For example, the cost of coal-fired power today was around 30 Chinese cents per kilowatt hour. But the wind and solar power, their cost was between 10 and 20 cents per kilowatt hour. So that's why we see a fast growth of the wind and solar power in the last 3 years. So here I think a very important lesson is that for industrial project to succeed, the government support must be targeted towards some sector that consider with the country's comparative advantage. Actually, not only China, most developed countries like many European countries and the US also subsidize wind and solar and EVs even today, right? But why they cannot have such success of renewable development? I think the main reason is that because China has a very strong competitive advantage in manufacturing production. That's the US and European countries do not have. So even they have spend a lot of money, maybe more money than China to subsidize the wind and solar and the EV, but still they cannot have a strong production capacity of renewable sectors. Okay, I think that's all I want to share. Thank you.
Okay, no, thank you. Thank you for that.